This training today is sponsored by the Workforce Development Board of Alameda County. And today we are so pleased to have Darlene Hawkins, the Business Services Manager there, who is here to share more about the resources available to employers like yourself. Hi, Darlene.
Hi, Anna. Thank you for having me here today. Thank you to all of you who join us in learning about the Alameda County Workforce Development Board. Again, my name is Darlene Sloan Hawkins, and I'm the Business Services Manager. We have a core service delivery for those businesses within Alameda County. We have on-the-job training programs, incumbent worker customized training programs. We are supporting employers who are wanting to get started with pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship, and along with resource and referrals and just supporting your general business service needs. So please reach out to us if you have any questions. You're looking to hire or connect to our local career centers. We are happy to support you. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you again for your webinar sponsorship and for everything that you do for employers in Alameda County. So now I'd love to introduce our trainer today. We have Astrid Servin, one of our amazing HR directors. So you are in wonderful hands. And Astrid, it's all yours.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Darlene, and thank you, Alameda County. Thank you for joining us today for tips for your employee handbook. This webinar will provide you with guidance on the importance of an employee handbook. We should mention that Alameda County does provide a handbook template both in English and in Spanish for you. So please reach out to your Workforce Development Board if you need questions or have need the resource, need to get a hold of that employee handbook template, give this number a call or reach out to Alameda Workforce Development Board because that is a wonderful resource that they have provided for Alameda County. And that's both in English and in Spanish. So a little bit about us. We're the California Employers Association, and we're delighted to partner with the Alameda Workforce Development Board. What we are is an HR consulting company, and we're excited to be partnering with you all, but because we do offer that hotline where we can get to know you a little bit better. So anytime you have any kind of question or concern regarding employees at your workplace, whether that be while you're in onboarding them or even before that when you're interviewing them, posting for that position, for example, all the way through the employee cycle, all the way to termination, post termination, you get a notice in the mail. Those are the kinds of questions that we field here at the HR hotline. So give us a call. If you require a little bit more assistance beyond what the hotline provides, then we also do offer membership. And with your membership, you get additional resources such as fact sheets and toolkits through a variety of topics that we have here in HR. And we also do a lot of training such as this one, plus additional trainings that we come on site for. We also help with investigations, all sorts of things that encompass an employee and through the employee cycle at work. So visit us at employers.org. What we are not is a law firm. So we do partner with a lot of law firms and we can guide you to one of them if that's something that is important to you or something that happens to be of legal significance. This presentation, however, is just educational in purpose. We're going to discuss the importance of an employee handbook, but none of what we discuss is legal advice. We will talk a lot about laws, a lot about best practices. And what we're going to cover today are those benefits and risks because a handbook can hurt you or can harm you. And we don't want that to happen. We want it to be a benefit to you. And so, so we want that to be well written and a good handbook. If you follow the employee template that CEA provides, you're in good hands. But once you start adding in your personalization of your handbook, you want to make sure you're careful about that, what you add, and also that you train your employees on your supervisors, especially on what's in that handbook. So we're going to talk about those benefits, why you should have one, the kinds of things you should include, the essential provisions, what are those best practices. Also reviewing and editing. We're almost in the end of the year for 2025. So if you're looking to see maybe start the new year fresh, what should we be looking at for 2026? And then we'll discuss those annual checkups, of course, and reminders as well. So let's take a look at starting out with the handbook benefits. What are the benefits of having a handbook? Number one, by far, is that it sets a positive tone for your business. So more and more, you want to know when an employee starts working for you, they want to know what kind of company am I working for? And that handbook having just having a handbook period really sets the tone for that employee to know that they're being cared for. So we want to make sure, have we inherited an old handbook? Is it an out of state one that I just downloaded possibly from from the internet? Look at all those things right now. What kind of handbook and what kind of appearance do you want it to look like when you present it to your employees? So we want to make sure that it has a positive tone, that it doesn't have all that legal jargon that employees just don't read. A lot of those handbooks have those fancy schmancy aforementioned words like that that nobody wants to read. And so we want to make it friendly so employees can actually understand what they're reading. We want to make sure we have a confirmation of an at-will employment. We're going to discuss at-will employment a little bit more in future slides, but we want to make sure that we have that confirmation of at-will employment at the beginning of that handbook, because that also sets the tone. This is telling the employee that we do not have a contract for a definite amount of time for you to be employed here. This is an at-will employment, meaning you or I can end the employment relationship at any time. We also serves for a reminder of employees' explanation of policies. What are they expected to do? Sets the expectations for the employees as well. We want to make sure we're consistently following those policies. What do we say? What do we mean? How do we want you to behave? And then we want to have uniformity and consistency along that way. So all the sections in our handbook should be related to each other. They shouldn't be conflicting. And then we should also ensure that our supervisors and management team are applying these policies throughout with everyone. So we don't have one department that allows a lot of leniency with attendance while another department doesn't. So that uniformity, consistency is key so that we don't get a discrimination claim. And then the defense against harassment claims, because another criteria we want included in the handbook is a harassment policy, a harassment-free policy. And that is required in California to have a policy. So the handbook's a great way to put it. And you're going to list out many required things in that policy that we'll discuss. And then another great one, the last one, is union avoidance. We do want to avoid unions as much as possible if you're not a union environment already. So when we have a handbook, it really tells the employee where I should go to complain, what I should do, what's expected of me. And that really prevents them from then going to a union meeting, for example, where they're frustrated and upset because they have no idea what the workplace rules are. So really setting a positive step to staying union free is oftentimes just as simple as having a handbook. So ensure those are a lot of great reasons why to have a handbook. So what to avoid? Of course, not following your handbooks. If you have a handbook and you're not following it, that's when there's a risk involved, higher risk involved when we're just having this handbook out there that we don't follow, we're not consistent about, we're not reviewing it. Maybe it's an old, outdated. I can't tell you how many employers call in and say, I'm using a handbook from 2020 or 2023. So many laws have changed since then, and that is an outdated handbook now. So again, can harm you. It can really hurt you because you're not following those rules. You're following new ones, or maybe you are following the old rules from 2020, which are not valid anymore and not compliant. We don't update our handbook, so that's another one. And then we download maybe a random version from the internet because, ChatGPT can make you a handbook, but is it compliant? Does it know the tricky California rules? So maybe we borrowed one, we inherited one, or we borrowed one from someone. Also, just not appropriate, creates this high risk. We're looking right now towards the end of the year, so we're looking ahead at 2026. What are the new laws that are getting into? Ensure, actually, in fact, tomorrow we have a labor law update on November 20th that you can sign up for to learn all about the new laws for 2026. So creating your new handbook, assess your current policies. What policies are going to remain in place? Maybe they're outdated. We don't need them anymore. They used to be where we had this procedure, this policy in 2020 when things were different, but the workforce looks very different now and we don't need it. So make sure that you're reviewing them. And then the ideal handbook has policies that are carefully and clearly worded. Again, we want that to be understood by every employee. The average employee should be able to understand what's written in those policies. It's an accurate reflection of your policy. We want it to make sure that, again, that it's that it's actually what your work environment it feels like, that it's not someone else's work environment, but the one that they work in right now. It's understood by the audience. And then consistent with applicable legal requirements, ensuring that we're compliant, especially right now as we're looking at 2026. And that, of course, we don't want it to be a snooze fest. We want employees to actually understand, and they're not going to read it from cover to cover. However, we want them to refer to it should they need something. They're going to know, okay, I should be looking at my handbook and looking to see what it is that is relevant to me. The other thing to keep in mind is ensuring that it's actually a handbook and not a policy manual. And I know I have a lot of employers that are small employers, and they typically tend to do something that's called a policy manual. And those are two very different things. So a handbook generally is applicable policies. We're going to include all the policies. It has abbreviated coverage for things like benefits. We're going to send them to our benefit provider for things that are more detailed. And it's for everyone. It applies to everyone in the workplace. We're going to have all our leave of absences. We're going to have all our workers' comp information, sick leave, vacation, benefit, that kind of stuff. A policy manual is really just usually it's for supervisors, managers, or it creates what our operations are like. So it sets procedures for our operations, different than our personnel. Handbooks are for the personnel. How does it apply to me as an employee at this job? Where policy is operations. It's what do I do with this machine? What do I do with this procedure? How do I handle this customer, this client? And it does usually have more detailed coverage. It has forms, fill out these forms. These are the steps. And again, it typically applies to managers and supervisors. And you can absolutely have a policy manual, but we want you to have it separate from your handbook because those are two different documents, not related. Okay. All right. So what are the essentials? Let's talk about basic and options. What do we need in a handbook? We want to avoid confusion because I've reviewed a lot of handbooks and I can tell you that when it's a well-written handbook, I can tell the employer cares about that employee. And we have very few people coming to us with misunderstandings or exceptions because it's clearly worded. It also tells what's required, what are the best practices, and then other options to consider. So let's talk about those things next. So this may sound familiar to you. If someone says, you can't change my job description, we get those employees who get very heated sometimes in their workplace and they've been asked to do something and they're saying that, or they say something like, that's not in my job description. I don't need to do that. What about, do we have to give 2 weeks notice? Because I really want to start this job tomorrow. Do I have to give 2 weeks notice? Another one, if my coworker makes me uncomfortable, what do I do? An employee could ask themselves that. Somebody might say, my friend who is an attorney or a lawyer says, you have to give me that time off and it has to be paid. How do you respond to that? And then other employees, of the holidays coming up, they're going to say, do I get paid for holidays? Or you need to pay me for holidays. I got paid for that holiday in my last work. Why are you not paying me for that holiday? How much vacation do I get each year? What if I don't want to take my breaks? Is that okay? So all these questions might sound very familiar to a new or a supervisor or a manager at a workplace. Do you know how to answer those? And you can test your base there, your management base, as would you be able to answer these questions? And if the answer is I'm not sure or I don't know, then you should go to your employee handbook because all these questions should be answered in your employee handbook. It should address all these things on here. So you want to include certain statements. They're very important to have in an employee handbook. And typically this first statement we include in the very beginning of a handbook. It'll make the statement that an employer can change the terms and conditions of employment, meaning termination, demotion, transfer, reassignment without advance notice or cause. So when that employee says, that's not in my job description or I don't have to do that, we can refer to this statement. This statement means we can do anything at any time for any reason, really, without advance notice or cause. Now, we don't want to do it for discriminatory reasons, and that can get you in hot water, but we want to have these statements because it does protect us. We want to have the at-will status that says it's not subject to change except in writing, signed by the employee and expressly designated company rep. And that expressly designated company rep is usually a very, very high level employee, usually typically a CEO or the owner or the general manager, whoever's at the top, and it's usually the one person that can change the at-will status. We don't want willy-nilly and a supervisor or manager saying something or promising an employee something, because we know it happens. And if they do, then this statement will protect the company. Include an integration clause. The handbook supersedes prior policies, especially if you've never had a handbook and you're now implementing it. And maybe you had a practice that was often, followed in the past. You're going to want to have this statement in there, which says, now this new way of doing things, this new handbook, this new policy supersedes anything that's old. So that if an employee files a claim against us, we can refer to this. Okay, so discrimination, harassment, and prevention. I mentioned that earlier. It is a requirement to have a policy against harassment and discrimination in the workplace. So this is a great opportunity to include that is in your handbook. We want to make sure that we're saying that we make employment decisions based on work-related factors. And we're saying things like we are going to base them on work performance or attendance or safety violations, violation of company policy. Those are our work-related reasons why we motivate us to do something. And then I'm going to show you the protected classes next. We want to have familiarity on all the protected classes. Now, I'll warn you, there's a lot. There's 19 protected classes in California. And I don't expect you to know them by heart, all of them, but just understand that there are a lot of protections and have a general idea of what they are, and then refer to them. And so in your handbook, you're going to list them all out. That is a requirement as part of your harassment prevention policy, is to include the protected classes. So I'll show you those next. And again, we want to just make sure we refer to them. So if I'm unsure if an employee is maybe making an allegation of discrimination, or I'm going to take adverse action against an employee and they belong to a protected class that's listed here, know that I can refer to the handbook and see, is this going to create risk for the company? Am I taking adverse action by disciplining this employee or terminating this employee, and they just disclose that they were part of a protected class such as pregnancy? That might create risk for the company, and that might be a reason maybe to pause or to take a double look at, should I be following this adverse action or not? So I won't read them all out to you. Just know there's quite a bit. There's quite a few of them. Some were just added this year. And so we want to make sure we update our handbook. Very good reason why, because a lot of these protected classes are updated annually. So we want to make sure they're reflected accurately in our policy. So our Fair Employment Housing Act, that lives in our Civil Rights Department in California, and they have provided guidance as to what is required of your policy. So when you have a harassment prevention policy in your handbook, it needs to include these statements that you're seeing in the bullet point here. So we want to make sure that we're making statements that it's illegal, it's not going to be tolerated. We're going to list out all those protected classes I showed you, and then we're going to discuss things about witness protection. So if you're witness someone, a third party, we're going to report those things. Anyone in the workplace can harass you and you can harass them. So we're going to include that statement. And anti-retaliation, nothing's going to happen to you if you report that to the company. And then we have to have the contact information spelled out with the links, the website links to the Civil Rights Department and the EEOC, so both. So ensure that your policy, even if you're not following CEA's handbook template, that your handbook is including all these elements on there. And then you're going to list out the detailed complaint process. Also very important. I won't read it all out to you, but just make sure that these elements are included in your policy. And if you do have 10% or more of your employees who speak a different language other than English, you do have to have this policy translated. The Civil Rights Department motivation there is that we want to make sure everyone understands what is written on this important policy. So you do have access to the English one and the Spanish one, but if you have a workforce that speaks a different language other than English or Spanish, you are going to want to get that translated into that language. All right, so switch gears here into leaves of absences. California has the most leaves of absences of any state, and we want to make sure that, again, we get that right. They're not always going to be something that you're an eligible employer for, but many times we are. Even small employers, if you just have 5 or more employees, it'll likely apply to you. So we want to make sure that we have an organized way of informing employees of their rights and responsibilities under the leave laws. And so this is a good way to do that, including it in the employee handbook. So one of those is the paid sick leave policy. Although not required again to have a handbook, it is requirement to give employees this policy. This lives under the Healthy Workplace and Healthy Families Act. And as you may know, we are now at 5 days or 40 hours of paid time off. And this is job protected time off, meaning we cannot deny this when an employee requests it because it is job protected and it is for their own serious health condition or that of their family member. And we make a little note here to be aware of job abandonment provisions. We just want to remind you if an employee does call out, for example, 3 days or fails to call out, I should say fails to call out, and you are going to do a job abandonment and they have sick time available, be careful because that sick time is protected. And if the employee comes back and says, I actually want to use sick leave for those 3 days, you might need to relook at that. You may still be able to move forward with a job abandonment, but it's going to be a little bit messy if they are requesting sick leave. For example, if they were hospitalized or so sick that they were unable to call on day 1, day 2, or day 3, and they had sick time available. So it's not always squeaky clean to do a job abandonment if you don't hear from an employee after 3 days if they still have sick time on the books. So just kind of a little word of caution there. So what is this paid sick leave? How do I do it? How do I implement it? There's various ways to do that in California. You could do the accrual method, which is 1 hour for every 30 that you work, and it is capped. So if you're going to do that, so you're going to do 1 hour for every 30, you're going to accrue. You have to let that accrual go all the way to 80 hours or 10 days. But then you're going to tell the employee, I know you've accrued up to 80 hours in the year, but you can only use 40 of those hours or 5 days in that year. Now, that is the state of California. We're going to talk about, because I know I'm in Alameda County, there's lots of employers in different cities and municipalities where that might be higher. And we'll talk about that next. This is generally for California. Then we also, if you don't like that way of doing it, because you have to track 1 hour for every 30, then the other way of doing it is a lump sum method. And with the lump sum method is you just grant every employee 5 days or 40 hours every year, and that expires. So you don't have to carry it over the way with the accrual, you got to carry that over. But with the lump sum, it's a use it or lose it. I give you 5 days, 40 hours, you use it or lose it. I don't need to accrue to 80. I don't need to roll it over. So a lot of times that's the easiest, less administrative, cumbersome way of doing it is that lump sum way of doing it. Now, you can also choose a PTO option or a paid time off where you combine those 40 hours of sick along with a vacation policy that you might have. And you could be compliant if you do that. However, that entire PTO bank, that entire PTO balance becomes, you have to pay that at termination because there is no use it or lose it. So with the PTO, you do have to have the accrual, you do have to continue it on, or you have to pay it out at the end of the year. So very different. Paid sick leave is not paid out at termination unless it's part of that PTO plan. So part of a PTO plan, the sick leave becomes active like a vacation balance. And so the vacation laws apply there. Another thing you can note is that, and you should note in your handbook in that policy, is that you're going to require your new hires to wait 90 days before they can use paid sick leave. So, for example, if you're going to do the lump sum of granting an employee 40 hours, you do need to grant it on day 1, but you're going to tell that employee that they have to wait 90 days before they can actually start using that. That's the way we would track that. Make sure that that paid sick leave shows up on their pay stub. It does need to be a balance there on that pay stub that tells them how much paid sick time. So make sure these elements are in that policy in your handbook. You also should have a disclaimer that we cannot retaliate against you for using your sick leave. I mentioned before, be aware of those sick leave ordinances. Since I am in Alameda County, there are different cities and municipalities within the county that do require additional sick time beyond the 40 hours. So some that come to mind are Berkeley, Emeryville, Oakland. They may require more than 5 days or 40 hours. And usually when there is a higher sick leave, there's also a higher minimum wage. So we do have at our website at employers.org a California local minimum wage and paid sick leave fact sheet that you can access so that you can keep track of that. And those are going to change possibly in 2026. Usually those change right around July 1st of every year. Minimum wage will change for the state come January 1, 2026. But the municipalities sometimes takes a while, usually in July, sometimes in April, for those to change. But if you follow our bit.ly, if you follow our forms, we will update those. So right now, if you go on to our website, you're going to see the 2025 minimum wage. We will update those as soon as 2026 hits. Okay. Another element, another leave that you need to include in your handbook is pregnancy disability leave. And not only should you include it in your handbook, but you should be aware of what it is because employees are eligible as of day one. So this is one of those leaves where you do have to have 5 employees for that to apply to your workforce. However, an employee just has to work with you one day and they are protected against any discrimination for pregnancy disability leave. They become eligible once a healthcare provider states that they cannot perform one or more of the essential functions of their job without undue risk to themselves or their pregnancy's successful completion. So it does need to be with substantiation from a medical doctor or from a healthcare provider, I should say. Pregnancy disability leave can occur before, during, or after the actual birth. So it could include things like visits to the doctor, sick leave because they have morning sickness, for example. It can include bed rest. So it can be before, it could be during, or it could be after they have complications from the pregnancy. It can also cover them there. How much do they get? Well, they get up to 4 months. They typically don't get the full 4 months because a doctor does need to disable that employee, and they typically aren't disabled for that long. Typically, a normal pregnancy will be about 6 to 8 weeks. But if they have complications, things happen, then it can get up to 4 months of time off. The amount of leave is per pregnancy. So if an employee does fail, maybe they have a failed pregnancy, they were pregnant, they were taking time off, they were on bed rest, they lose the baby, for example, then they get pregnant again, they will have this time available to them again. So it's per pregnancy, not the way the CFRA works. Leave can be used all at once or intermittently, meaning they might have morning sickness or they might have a doctor's appointment or bed rest, and so they take it in increments of time. You can require the use of sick leave. So if they have sick leave available, you can require them. There's some exceptions there. So make sure that you give us a call if that should happen. And then time needed must be certified by that healthcare provider. So we can request that. So you want to make sure all those elements are in that handbook when you're rolling out that policy. The next policy is that you should have in your handbook is California Family Rights Act. This is for employers with 5 or more employees. So it is going to be just about everyone. And that you need to make statements. And again, all these elements and information have to be included in your policy that you provide up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave for eligible employees. An eligible employee is one that works at a location where you have 5 or more employees, and they could be anywhere. It doesn't have to be in one single location. It could be where I have 5 employees within the state of California, within the United States, within the world, we have 5 employees. But if I live in California, I become an eligible employee. And if I have worked with you for 12 months, and in that 12 months, I worked 1,250 hours. So in that prior 12 months. So I'll have to look and see, because if I'm a part-time employee, I may not be eligible for this leave. The covered reasons why I can take a California Family Rights Act are for the birth of a child, adoption, foster, for my own serious health condition, or to care for a family member that has a serious health condition. You can also designate a designated person. So maybe I have a live-in boyfriend that is not my spouse, but I want to designate him as my designated person, and now I need to care for him. That is also covered. There's also some active duty status with armed forces where we need to allow employees whose spouse is on leave. That is also covered under California Family Rights Act. Okay, this is for my larger employers. So if you have 50 or more employees, you're covered by the FMLA, which also needs to be in your handbook if you have 50 or more employees. And very similar to the CFRA, we're providing 12 weeks of unpaid time off, and CFRA is also unpaid. Employees are eligible if they work at a location. This one's a little bit different from CFRA because in that work location, they have to have 50 or more employees within a 75-mile radius. So if I have a couple locations within 75 miles of each other and collectively I have 50 or more, then you become an FMLA qualified employer. You still have to have worked 12 months and in that time be just about full time, about 1,250 hours in those 12 months prior. So very important leave law that we need to inform our employees about. And again, the handbook is a great place to do that. Bereavement leave. So bereavement leave is another one of those that is fairly new. Bereavement leave is one that we have to have in our handbook because it is a requirement for employers to have that. If you have 5 or more employees, we have to allow 5 days, and this is unpaid time off. So it's not going to cost you anything for the employee to be out, but we do need to have job protection. So we have to guarantee their job back, and we need to allow them to take this time. Eligible employee has been employed with you for at least 30 days before the leave. So if a death happens before they're with you for 30 days, you can deny it. And again, this is where we need clarity. We want to put this policy in our handbook and be thorough about how you are eligible. Employees have to use the leave within 3 months of the date of death. So if, for example, they want to take a day off because they're in mourning and they're upset, and then they have a memorial they need to go to and it's out of town, and so now they're taking 2 days, it can be taken intermittently. We cannot require them to use it consecutively. And the last thing is we do can, if you want to, and again, this is where your handbook is going to be key because you're going to list the policy there on whether or not we need substantiation. So some employers are like, no, I believe my employees, they wouldn't lie about something like that. And some employers, have reasons for wanting that substantiation, but we want to be consistent, right? We don't want to do it for one and not for the other. So putting it in the policy and ensuring that this is our policy. We ask everyone for substantiation. This is how we tell employees that this is a requirement. So don't forget to update your policy and forms, have something available for them. Remember, this leave is unpaid, but your employees can elect to use vacation or sick or PTO, and we have to allow them that option because it's an unpaid leave. Now, you can make it paid if you want to. A lot of companies do the traditional 3 days of paid time off, but since we have to allow for 5 days, you can make a statement such as the first 3 days of your 5 days is paid. Anything beyond the 3 days, you have to use vacation, sick, or PTO, whatever you allow. That needs to be an option for employees to use. Now, they may say, I would like to take 5 days unpaid and I don't want to use my sick leave, and that is okay too. You cannot force that. Employer policy may provide for paid leave. Again, that's what we discussed earlier. You can do a partial payment. You can cover the whole 5 days, but this is where your policy is going to tell them how you function. And it should be very clear. It shouldn't be where we decide the day you request it, what we're going to do with it. That would be inconsistent. We have to also maintain confidentiality, which is interesting because typically what's done when someone has a loss in the family is we send a bereavement card, maybe we send flowers, but we want to maintain confidentiality because that is in the statute. That's actually in the law that we have to maintain it confidential. So be careful with that. Know your audience, know your employees, know your practice on doing that. We want to try to be respectful and maintain confidentiality. Now, who is covered under this bereavement leave? It's really covered family members, and there's a definition of who a family member is that's listed on here. And it's important to note that this leave is per death, not per year. So if an employee, has an unfortunate year where they lose a couple of family members, it is per death that you have to allow this unpaid time off. And you could put a limit to your paid time off. So maybe you do allow 3 days, and that could be 3 days a year and not per death as well. But this is where you want clarity, right? There's some more protected leaves that we want you to include in your handbook. And it really depends on how many employees you have, whether you are required to put these leave laws in. So we do have, if you go to employers.org under HR forms, we have a handy fact sheet that's called employer laws and the employers they affect. So employee laws and the employers they affect. So if you do a search for those for employee laws and who is affected by it, you'll get that fact sheet, and it'll include all these protected laws that I'm showing you and what the employee headcount is, so that you know whether or not you're supposed to put them in your handbook or not. Let's talk about some wage and hour that we're going to leave the leave law land and go into wage and hour, because we do have to pay our employees. So what do we pay them and what falls under wage and hour? Let's get into that next. We want to define our workday and our work week in our handbook. This is very important to know if you owe overtime or double time, because we have a option to define what the workday and the work week is in California. So you want to define that in your handbook. It's any consecutive 24-hour period that begins at the same time each calendar day. And there is a presumption. So if you fail to do this, you don't list it out, or you like California's, then you're fine, because the presumption is 12:01 a.m. to 12 a.m. So we're using that clock to see how many hours you work in a work day. And if you go over 8 in that work day that we define, then we owe you overtime. And the same thing applies with the work week, because the definition of a work week is any 7 consecutive days that start with the same calendar day each week. There is a presumption, again, that it is Sunday through Saturday. If yours is not Sunday through Saturday, you want to put that in your handbook of what it is. Maybe it's Monday through Sunday. So please make sure you define that. Where it becomes important is that we do need to pay overtime on the 7th consecutive day that you work. And if you work 7 consecutive days, but they are in 2 different work weeks, then we do not owe you any overtime. So this is where it's very important how you define that. So this is where I kind of go over overtime, which you should also put in your handbook, that we're paying time and a half of regular rate of pay for anything over that 8 hours in that work day, over 40 in the work week, and then the first 8 hours on the 7th consecutive day, but only if they're in that same work week. So this is where it's going to be important to define. And then we get into double time, or 2 times the regular rate of pay for anything over 12 hours in a workday, or after 8 hours on that 7th consecutive day. So also we want to make sure that we're clear in our handbooks about when this applies. Now, this is what we call low-hanging fruit for attorneys. They will look and see whether or not you're doing breaks and meal periods correctly. If an employee is disgruntled, if they're upset, they feel they're mistreated, they're going to go to an attorney and say that, right? I don't feel like I was treated fairly. The most likely, the attorney is going to look at wage and hour ways to get back at you. Did they give you their breaks on time? Did they give you a meal period? When did they give it to you? So we want to make sure that our handbook reflects what is compliant, what is California requires us to do, because there could be very costly wage and hour claims. We have class action lawsuits that fall under the wage and hour categories, and this is where that happens. So we want to include a section in the handbook about our meal and break periods, so that we're very clear to employees how many do they get and how do I pay you. This is for our non-exempt or our hourly folks. And we want to make sure train our managers in this section so that they follow this policy. A lot of times you in management or you in HR do not see this, but your management team is there firsthand witnessing whether or not their employees are taking their breaks or lunches. So ensuring that we review this with our supervisors and that we have it in the handbook, so that even if the employee says, I didn't know that, you can say, yes, you did, because it's in the handbook. So for rest breaks, an employer is to authorize and permit an employee to take 10 minutes of what we call net rest time for every 4 hours or major fraction of hours worked. So that rest period needs to be in the middle of a work period, and the rest periods are paid and not and need to be not I'm sorry, the rest periods are paid time. The employer is paying for them, so we do not have to record them on the time card. We don't have to say that they took the rest break. Meal period's a different story, but the rest break we don't have to record. Now you can, it's an option if you want to record that rest period to show, but we're not deducting that from their time. So maybe record it a different way, not where they're clocking in and out, but maybe recording it a different way. You cannot require them to remain on the premises. That's another thing too. You need to allow them to be free and take their rest break the same way they take their meal period. If you fail to provide a rest period, you do need to owe them an hour of what we call penalty pay for that workday. So it's 1 hour of their regular rate of pay. And here's a chart that shows how many rest breaks to take depending on how many hours you work. Just have that chart in your handbook. Meal periods work very similar to that, except for that it's 30 minutes that we're breaking an employee, and they have to take that anytime they work more than 5 hours in a day. That does need to be recorded as a requirement for us to see when you took that meal period, because we want to make sure that you take it before the fifth hour. Before the fifth hour means you're working into your 4 hours and 59-minute shift. That's when that time, the latest it can be recorded. Now, hopefully you take it and record it way before 4 hours and 59 minutes, but that's the absolute latest that you can record that meal break. If you fail to do that, it goes over, you were busy, things happen. Just make sure that you're paying 1 hour for failure to pay of that penalty pay. And that 1 hour has to be paid at the regular rate of pay. Ensuring that when we do meal breaks and lunches, employees know they have to be relieved of all job duties. So if you are on your lunch break, you're clocked out, and I call you back for whatever reason, hey, we were waiting for that important client to call and they finally are on the phone, I need you to come back. All right, we just interrupted their 30-minute meal break, so we do owe them that 1 hour penalty pay. You're seeing on the chart here how many hours that they need to take, how many hours would dictate how many meal periods they need to take. So typically it's 1 hour in an 8-hour period, one 30-minute break for an 8-hour day, but it could be more if they go over on hours. Some meal and rest policy tips to kind of round out our wage and hour section. These policies, you make sure that we're not restricting where the employees are during their meal or rest breaks, that they're free to go about wherever they want, that you can set a policy that the employees have to be at their workstation promptly at the end of their break or at the end of their meal period. You can also ensure that you're telling employees, maybe in the time card that they sign at the end of the pay period, that they were afforded any breaks or lunches. And if they weren't, that we're telling a supervisor or manager that they missed my break or missed my meal period and the reason why, so that we know that we need to pay you that premium pay. And then the rounding reminder. The rounding reminder is that we don't want to round our time. Definitely cannot. It's illegal to round any meal period. So if an employee is taking 29 minutes, that would be a failure to relieve them for 30 minutes, and we owe them an hour of premium pay, penalty pay. We can't round it to 30 minutes. And we can have ins and outs. So if you're starting at 8 a.m. and you're ending at 5 p.m., you clock out at 7:58, we should really be paying them at 7:58 through whatever time they work in the evening. And if that incurs a minute or two of overtime, so be it. But we don't want to round to 8. Now, the courts are split on this, rounding at the in and out time. They're very clear that the 30-minute break can't be rounded, but there's a little bit of a split with the entry and exit of your work time. However, the best practice is that we don't round at all, and that's probably what's going to be coming soon. Okay, as we kind of end the last 15 minutes, I'd like to spend some time talking about workplace benefits and expectations, because there's a lot of very specific things that we need to cover in California as it relates to vacation, our conduct, our do's and don'ts, best practices, what we need to do for our employees as they work for us. Okay, first thing I'll cover is vacation, because vacation is one of those things where you don't have to offer vacation in California if you don't want to. But if you do, then California says, well, now we're going to tell you what you can and cannot do with your policy. Vacation time is treated as wages. And so they're very specific about what you can and cannot do with those employee wages, meaning they cannot lose those wages. They have to be paid out to the employee in one way or another. You can, however, set a reasonable cap, and you should. So if an employee is accruing time, they accrue 40 hours in a year, you can set a reasonable cap, but the cap can't be 40 hours. So if they're accruing 40 hours in a year, you cannot cap it at 40. That wouldn't be reasonable. What the state of California California has said is reasonable is time and a half. So if you have 40 hours are accrued in year one, you have to allow for that accrual to go to 60 hours at least, so 1.5 times before they cap that. So what that looks like is an employee works year one and doesn't take any vacation, so now they've accrued 40 hours. You need to allow for that rollover, or you can pay it out, either one. But if you allow for them to roll it over to the second year, then they continue to accrue until they reach 60 hours, and then they stop accruing. And that would be an appropriate policy to have. You want to make sure you're consistent and that you don't have a use it or lose it policy. So in the example I gave, you have 40 hours being accrued on year one, and then you're allowing that accrual to continue to be compliant, or on December 31st, January 1, you pay it out because you don't want them to continue to accrue it. But what you can't do is say, oh, but if you didn't use it, you lose it. That is not allowed. So we have to be able to pay it out or accrue or roll it over. And if at any time they leave you and they have vacation accrued on the books, then you have to pay it out. Again, in my example, employee is accruing 40 hours a year, and maybe you have a policy that says they have to wait a year before they can use that vacation. Well, the state of California recognizes that they have been accruing that 40 hours throughout even if you didn't let them use it, because in California we're accruing daily our vacation, then that employee has been accruing vacation throughout that year. You just didn't let them use it until the end of the year. What that means is if that employee leaves you at 6 months, for example, then that employee has accrued about 20 hours of vacation, and that should be paid out to that employee. So remember, no use it or lose it policy. So if you say after 1 year you have 40 hours, that means that they have been accruing, and at right around 6 months, they have probably around 20 hours accumulated, even if they weren't able to use them, and they leave you, now you need to pay it out. Now, personal days and floating holidays are very popular, becoming less popular in California because California will treat those personal days and floating days just like vacation, meaning if the employee didn't use their floating holiday or their personal day by the date that they termed, then they need to be paid out. Or if they didn't use it by the end of the year, it needs to be paid out or rolled over. You can never, you have a use it or lose it on personal days or floating holidays either. There's some other nuances there, so give us a call if you do want to continue to implement floating holidays and personal days so that you get it right. Now, we also want to just recommend you have a drug-free workplace policy. That is important because the day may come when your employee comes into work intoxicated, and it's a very scary, very dramatic thing when it happens. You want to make sure you have a policy that tells employers what to do, supervisors, management team, what to do should that happen. So we want to make sure employees know that you have a policy on them, that you will test them should they come to work under the influence. There is no law that precludes disciplinary action against employees under the influence. So meaning we know we have a right to cannabis and a right to drink alcohol, for example, and use drugs outside, prescription drugs outside of work. But if you come to work intoxicated, we have a right to discipline you. Okay, so there are substance abuse policies, but not on the job use. So there's protections for employees who say, maybe I have an addiction problem, but they shouldn't be high while they're at work. So you want to have a policy that makes that explanation and that talks about that. So I talked a little bit about cannabis use. Of course, that is a protected class now where we need to allow employees, if they want to use cannabis recreationally, we cannot discriminate or take any adverse action against them while they use it off the job and away from the workplace. It doesn't permit an employee to possess or be impaired while on the job. And there are exceptions for this where you can't, maybe you can still not allow it at all if you work in the building and construction trades, where maybe there is testing that is required for federal law, then we can continue to make sure that they don't use it even recreationally. Here are some suggested discipline policies. So we're going to go to discipline now. Employees can be disciplined if they fail to follow certain policies. But what we don't want you to do is have a lockstep disciplinary process where we say, we have to give you a verbal, and then another verbal, and then a written warning, and then a final written warning, and then we're going to terminate you. We don't want that kind of lockstep disciplinary process. That's not what we recommend, because if the conduct is egregious enough, we want to be able to bypass those steps and just terminate you, right? So we want to present discipline as a guideline rather than required progressive steps. There is progressive discipline for certain things, such as performance or attendance. However, there are other more egregious acts that can, on a one-time case, terminate you, right? So we want to reiterate that the employment is at will and that disciplinary action doesn't alter that at will status, meaning I don't have to follow this verbal, written before I terminate you because we're at will. I can just terminate you. Some suggested language is a violation of any company policy, either written or otherwise, may result in disciplinary action up to and including termination. We want that statement to be on all your disciplinary. So if you have a verbal or a written warning, we're including this disciplinary language on there so that they understand next time you can be terminated for this, you know? You should have some integrity policies because these policies define the expectations and restrictions of your employees, and they can really be valuable in your restrictions of unacceptable behavior, as well as supporting misconduct terminations if you have those. So we want to make sure employees know we have an open door policy. You can come to us and complain at any time. We want to have a conduct policy that says how you should behave, and if you don't behave in a professional manner, then there will be disciplinary process that will happen. We want to have attendance policies that are reasonable, that we're not just terminating you after you miss one day. Your attendance policies should also take into consideration your sick leave, which is protected. Drug and alcohol testing, we talked about that. We want to have a workplace violence protection. We actually have to have a whole policy on workplace violence protection. We have to have a plan that's required. You can include that in your handbook or keep that separate. Talk about workplace violence and weapons, electronic communications, no solicitations important. What about dating in the workplace? Maybe that's something that's important that you should have in your policy. And then outside employment, are you going to preclude people from working for other employers while they work for you? Ensure that it is a compliant policy, that we're not saying too much or too little on that. A few more suggested policies. We want you to have a social media account policy that says what can an employee do or not do on their social media. Mobile phone device use, can they use their phone at work? Are we restricting them? Be careful with that as well. We'll talk about that soon here too. Breaks, meal periods, after hours, when can they use it? Company vehicles and gas cards. So if that's something that you do or require of employees, if they have company property, are we checking it out? Are we have a policy on that company property? And same thing with personal vehicle use if they are using their vehicle for their own work business that they're doing. Let me talk to you just a minute because I know we're rounding out the hour here on the Stericycle decision. This is a Stericycle is the NLRA or the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, that protects employees' right to discuss wages and other terms and conditions of employment. So this is not just for union environments, which a lot of employers think this is only for union environments. This is for any employer, private or public employees. We want to make sure that we're aware that this exists out there. So this is when you're maybe telling employees that they cannot talk to other employees about their wages or they need to behave in a certain way. So this is a challenge workplace rule will be presumed. So if you have a policy like that, that's kind of quiets an employee, it's going to be presumed unlawful if it has a reasonable tendency to chill the employee's exercise of their rights to discuss wages and other terms of conditions of employment. So this is what's called Section 7 rights, meaning employees have a right to complain. They have a right to say, I don't agree with this, I don't like this. And it really places more scrutiny on workplace rules. You want to make sure that you're looking at your policies as it relates to social media, confidentiality, conduct, that if we're limiting employees and what they can and cannot do, it's really going to place a scrutiny on those laws to ensure that employees have a right to talk about these things. So employers can rebut the presumption, but it is a steep hill. So we want to make sure that bottom line, policies can't be too broad, especially around those conduct, confidentiality, social media. So we want to write policies that are very clear about what they can and cannot do. We cannot bar employees from complaining or discussing work issues. So if you have old policies that says that, make sure that you're looking at them and rephrasing them. Don't use broad phrases like, you should always be positive employees. Don't talk about workplace issues at work, or don't share information with clients. That is also, again, you got to be very careful because you're limiting their right to be able to complain. So be very careful when you restrict employees about that kind of stuff. We don't want you to include probation periods in your handbook either. You can have an introductory period where we get to know each other. But if you say after 90 days, you may or may not work here, then that is really discrediting your at will statement because you're giving them sort of a contract that you have a definite 90 days to work here. So that probationary period is not recognized in California and can actually get you in hot water if an employee says, well, I thought I had 90 days to do this job. So be careful with that. We talked about that lockstep disciplinary approach, policies or language that imply job security, again, or contractual obligations. And then in-depth supervisory or managerial information, that's for management only. We don't want to put that in our handbook. And then the details of benefit plans such as healthcare or dental, those things change often. So we want to just steer them to the benefit provider for that. And then any pre-employment practices, they are our employee. If they're working for us and they're in front of us with the handbook, we don't need to include pre-employment practices in that handbook. You may want to consider an employee action hotline. It's a great proactive tool to reduce liability. We have many employers who have an employee action hotline, and they really use that to their advantage to learn about potential wrongful acts before they escalate. Maybe an employee uses that as a way to report a sexual harassment claim before it becomes bigger. It allows employees to assist the employer in maintaining a workplace standard, and because they're going to report what they observe, any concerns they have, and it can be done anonymously or not. So if that's something that sounds like you want to have for your workplace, your workforce, it works really well with the workplace violence prevention plan too, because that one requires you to have a separate outlet. So this is a great way to do that too. You can report any kind of workplace violence or issues or concerns as it relates to that in this employee action hotline. It's very inexpensive to have. If you're a member of CEA, it's only $6.99. If you're not a member, it's only $9.99. And great to have that peace of mind for employees to have an outlet to go. You get a lot of flyers, you get a lot of posters that you can put on there, and a designated toll-free number for you to use. So another thing to consider that goes hand in hand with your handbook, because you're going to reference it in your handbook. So check your handbook for required leaves of absence policies, post-accident, reasonable suspicion drug tests. Make sure we have those rest period and meal periods in your handbook so that employees are aware of how much they can take in a work period. And then harassment-free policy that says where they should be reporting these things. That we have all our protected classes listed on there. And then gender-specific references, because our Fair Employment Housing Act is gender neutral. We don't want to say things in our handbook like she or he. We want to just make references to employees can do this, employees can do that, or they can do this, but we're not saying he or she. Language which may violate the National Labor Relations Act, we're not saying you should always be positive, you should always have a sunny disposition, because things like that we might chill an employee from complaining. If you haven't updated your handbook in a year, it's probably out of date, so please check out Alameda County so that you can get your free employee template for English or Spanish as well. Okay, so some reminders here. Make sure you review it, make sure it's right, distribute it. It doesn't do you any good to have a handbook if we're not getting acknowledgments back that employees received it. Follow that, monitor, train your management team for consistency so that we're all aware that we're sending the same message. And then don't forget about those state and federal labor law posters. We have them available to purchase for 2026 because those are being updated for 2026. Ensure you have an injury illness prevention plan and that workplace violence prevention plan. Both those things are required for California employers. So we want to make sure we take care of that annually and that we're looking into it. Once again, if you require a little bit more than what the hotline offers, you may want to consider membership. Just visit us at employers.org for that. Just a few reminders to purchase your labor law update that employee handbook, and make sure that you're doing your harassment training too, because that is required every 2 years. So that is the end of our handbook training. We have the Alameda Workplace hotline for you to call into. If you have any questions or concerns, something might have sparked something for you to call in, just know that you can always give us a call as well. So I'm going to turn it back over to you all. Thank you for joining us today. I will also put in the, I don't know, am I doing that, Anna? Are we putting in the codes?
Yeah, definitely. We can go back to that slide.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure, give Astrid a break here. If you are joining us for continuing education credits, we do have your codes here up on the screen. So your HRCI code today is 723493, SHRM code 25-EEH5U. You can always call into that Alameda County HR hotline or reach out to us at ceainfo@employers.org if you need some guidance on what to do for recertification. And then again, we just want to, take a minute to thank the Alameda County Workforce Development Board, their entire team there for all these resources provided to you, both the HR hotline trainings like these, as well as those employee handbooks in both English and Spanish. So please take advantage of those resources available to you. Thank you, Darlene, to you and your entire team. Thank you, Astrid, for sharing your time and expertise with us. And we look forward to speaking with you all on the hotline and working with you again soon. Here's everyone. Thank you.